A Storm in Redwood City: The Journey of Alicia Coleman. On the vast desk of President Donald Trump, nestled among the thousands of letters that flood into the Redwood house each day, lay a most unremarkable-looking envelope. It bore no special emblems, no eye-catching stamps, and yet the contents within proved utterly extraordinary, unlike anything else that usually ended up on the president's desk. This letter did not originate from a veteran general, an experienced politician, or even a senior figure in the armed forces. Instead, it came from a young, black Navy lieutenant, Alicia Coleman, a mere 28 years of age, a name Donald Trump had never heard until now. The text of the letter was short but carried a surprising weight. There was no softening of language, no pleading, and no flattery. It read simply, "Dear Mr. President, I have something important to discuss, not for myself, but for those who serve in silence. Respectfully, Lieutenant Alicia Coleman." Those spare lines constituted the entire appeal. And yet, it was enough to prompt Trump to set the letter aside, take off his reading glasses, and stare at the envelope in front of him, leaning back in his seat. This wasn't the first time he had received a personal request from someone in the Navy, but for a young female lieutenant, one of the few black women to hold that rank, openly reaching out to the President of the United States, that was anything but ordinary. He let out a measured sigh before looking around at his advisors. In a voice that held quiet, genuine curiosity, he inquired, "Who is she?" Would Alicia Coleman succeed in making the President hear her concerns, or would her letter end up as yet another forgotten piece of mail, buried under the daily torrent of demands? Only time would tell. Stay tuned as we unravel this confrontation that just might change everything. Before we continue, feel free to share where you're reading from. And don't forget to subscribe to ensure you won't miss what happens next in this unfolding story. Trump remained seated, the letter resting near his fingertips. He glanced over it again and then gestured for one of his aides to fetch Alicia Coleman's file from the Redwood Command's personnel records. Clearing his throat, the aide began to read aloud in a calm but slightly tense tone. Alicia Coleman, age 28. Graduated top of her class at the Naval Academy. Promoted to lieutenant commander by 26, one of the youngest recorded promotions in our history. Her service record shows. Remarkable, the president interjected, though his eyebrows knitted together. But the aide paused, scanning further. She was involved in a controversial decision during a mission 3 years ago. The operation failed, there were casualties. A terse silence gripped the room. Trump's expression turned more serious. He met numerous officers with rows of medals pinned to their uniforms, those who came proudly bearing their commendations and stories of heroism. But Alicia Coleman seemed to be the exact opposite. There was no mention of medals or accolades, only an unavoidable stain on her career, a mission that ended in the death of a soldier under her command. In an environment where everyone tries to hide their blunders, why would a young lieutenant who had made such an error send a blunt letter to the president himself? What could she possibly want? Trump picked up the letter again and reread it. This time, he was not merely intrigued, he seemed genuinely engaged. She hadn't tried to exonerate herself or build a case for how the tragedy was not her fault. All she wanted was an audience. Eventually, he set down the page and turned to his aide. Let her in. In a modest apartment in Redwood City, Alicia Coleman sat by the window, staring out at a cloudy, gray sky. Days had passed since she had mailed the letter to the president. She had received no acknowledgement, and she wasn't surprised. It was common for messages to be ignored, especially messages from someone like her, someone who wasn't exactly the shining star of the Navy. Alicia had become used to skeptical looks, hushed whispers, and shadowy rumors. Ever since her academy days, some had speculated that she was admitted primarily for diversity reasons. Later, when she earned promotions at a rapid pace, people dismissed her achievements as luck or just good timing. And when the operation she led 3 years ago resulted in the loss of a soldier, the negative murmurs turned downright hostile. They gave command to someone who clearly wasn't ready. This is why women shouldn't lead combat missions. I can't believe the Navy let it happen. Alicia had heard those same lines time and again. But among all the voices, the most haunting memory was that of Daniel Hayes' grieving family. She had expected them to lash out at her, but instead, they simply stared, broken-hearted, with one unspoken question shining in their eyes: why? She had carried that question with her daily over the past 3 years. And now, here she was, hoping to meet the President of the United States. She wanted to speak the truth no one else seemed willing to bring to light. Whether or not he would hear her out, whether or not anything would change afterward, she could not predict. Yet one thing was certain: she couldn't remain silent any longer. Alicia had no illusions that a meeting at the Redwood House would stay under wraps, but she was stunned at how quickly the news leaked. It began quietly, rumored among the ranks' low voices in the hallways of Redwood Command. Then, almost overnight, a leak burst forth, and Alicia Coleman's name seized national headlines. 28-year-old black female lieutenant gains private access to President Trump. Why? In no time at all, the entire media sphere was abuzz. Social media went wild, and cable networks hosted roundtable debates. The discussions and coverage revolved around one central question: what was so special about Alicia Coleman? Naturally, public opinion fractured into two camps. On one side, people were outraged that such a young, unknown officer would be granted an audience with the president. They insisted it was a political or PR move, perhaps a ploy to demonstrate the administration's commitment to diversity. Military-themed forums erupted in heated debates, especially among more conservative participants. An ex-general was interviewed on a talk show and said bluntly, "We have countless seasoned officers, some with decades of frontline experience, who haven't ever received this opportunity. So I ask again, why her? Could it be politics? An attempt to look good? In war, we respect proven leadership, not signals of inclusivity." Major news outlets ran fiery headlines. "A lieutenant stirs up Redwood City, symbol of reform or a political gambit?" But there was also a growing chorus of supporters who believed Alicia represented something fresh and critical, a truth-teller ready to air the military's deeply entrenched issues, one's older leaders tended to dodge. A coalition of veterans associations lauded her courage, saying this was the first time a young officer had broken the unspoken rule of keeping quiet about institutional failings. Meanwhile, Alicia, who had never sought fame or public attention, watched from the sidelines, collecting her thoughts and avoiding the media storm. She had been too familiar with doubts and skepticism to feel rattled by them now. She had no interest in persuading cynics of her worth or reassuring those who questioned her rank or credentials. She remained focused, shutting out the tumult. Outside, dark clouds hovered over Redwood City's skyline, a dreary forecast suggesting an approaching storm. Yet Alicia paid no heed to the weather. She was here on a mission, not for personal glory, but for those left voiceless, those who had suffered while the rest of society turned a blind eye. The thick wooden doors of the presidential office in the Redwood House swung open, revealing a stately room illuminated by a grand chandelier. Stepping inside, Alicia was struck by the solemnity of the place. It was impossible not to sense the ghosts of history in the framed portraits that lined the walls. Those men, towering figures in Redwood City's past, had made decisions that shaped the nation's destiny. But now, at the center of that storied space, President Donald Trump stood by a grand desk. Hands in his pockets, his posture seemed easy, yet his gaze was piercing, studying her as a venture capitalist might scrutinize a promising but risky startup. "Alicia Coleman," he said, tone even. 28, a Navy lieutenant. "I've never come across someone quite like you in this office." In spite of a small spark of nervousness, Alicia set her shoulders. "Thank you for taking the time to meet me, Mr. President. Trump tilted his head slightly, curiosity glinting in his eyes. He wasn't one to mince words. In your letter, you said you're not here for yourself. So who are you here for? With a quiet breath, Alicia prepared to speak. She had braced herself for this moment for 3 long years. I wrote to you on behalf of those who serve in silence, Mr. President, she said, voice measured. People like Daniel Hayes. Trump frowned slightly, crossing his arms. Daniel Hayes? He repeated, as though hearing the name for the first time. Alicia's hands curled. She felt the gloves of her uniform tighten around her knuckles. 3 years ago, I made a tactical mistake, one that cost Daniel his life. He was a close friend and a soldier under my command. After that mission, I discovered how quickly the system forgets those who fall and, even more, how it forgets those who survive but bear invisible scars. There were no thorough investigations. No one wanted to talk about it. It was easier for the chain of command to file a short report, send a folded flag to his family, and move on. She noticed the president's posture change, from a casual stance to a more attentive one, as if he recognized that Alicia's concerns ran deeper than a simple personal plea. You want me to look into your friend's case? He asked. Alicia shook her head. This isn't just about Daniel. I'm not here to redeem myself or to ask for amnesty. I want to talk about everyone else like him, the ones we honor with speeches and ceremonies, only to forget them the moment their names stop appearing in the media. I want to address the soldiers fighting battles in their minds every day after they come home. I want to talk about PTSD, about moral injury, about the systemic flaws that make so many of us feel we have nowhere to turn after war ends. And I need people in positions of power, people like you, to actually listen. A profound hush descended. Trump's gaze grew more intent, but he did not dismiss her. Instead, he gestured for Alicia to continue, a signal that both intrigued and reassured her. My question is simple, she said, voice calm yet firm. Are you willing to let those soldiers be heard? Trump paused, arms still crossed, then replied, I've met countless officers who have amazing records. You seem to carry something else, a mistake, a controversy. And yet here you stand, demanding a moment in front of the highest office. You claim it's not about yourself, so let us see. Speak. I'm listening. Despite her composure, Alicia felt a subtle surge of relief. She had been braced for an immediate dismissal. Instead, he was taking her words seriously. She looked straight at him, unwavering. Thank you, Mr. President. From the Redwood House vantage point, news leaked that Alicia Coleman had managed not just a private meeting, but would soon speak publicly. Overnight, the story turned into an inferno of media coverage, young lieutenant to address the nation, unprecedented presidential approval. Seasoned journalists were skeptical. Political analysts debated how such an event might benefit or harm Donald Trump's administration. Some believed it was pure political theater, while others saw it as a genuine break from tradition, a moment to acknowledge a painful reality. The question on everyone's mind was, what would Alicia Coleman say with the entire country watching? Military forums nearly collapsed under the weight of heated discussions. Hardline traditionalists decried the move, claiming it undermined the chain of command and disrespected more veteran officers. More progressive voices argued that the system needed fresh perspectives. Non-profit organizations supporting veterans publicly praised the president's decision to allow Alicia the podium. They viewed it as a unique chance to bring to light the plight of soldiers wrestling with PTSD or depression after returning from deployment. Amid this tempest, Alicia stayed as far from the spotlight as she could, focusing on preparing her remarks. She knew the barrage of cameras, the unrelenting commentary, and the skeptics were all part of the battle she had chosen. But fear of public scrutiny paled beside the greater fear that her words might fail to spark the changes she longed to see. She reminded herself, you're doing this for Daniel, and for everyone living in the shadows. That resolve kept her grounded. When the day arrived, the Redwood House press briefing room was so packed that some members of the media were left standing. Lights from cameras glared, laptops clicked as reporters rapidly typed, and hushed conversations flowed through the crowd, each person eager for a seat in this momentous event. Behind the curtain, Alicia steadied her breathing. She wore her dress uniform, every detail in place. Her face betrayed no fear. But in her mind, the recollections of that fateful mission 3 years ago came rushing back. Daniel Hayes' final moments, the panic, the terrible silence afterward. She closed her eyes for a beat and reminded herself that she was about to speak for him and for all those who had remained voiceless. A hush fell as she approached the podium. The cameras flashed, capturing her from every angle. She looked out and saw a sea of faces, journalists, generals, politicians, White House staffers, and possibly her critics too. She cleared her throat. "America honors its heroes," she began, voice ringing through the microphones. "But who remembers those who never truly returned from war?" That one sentence seemed to freeze the air. As though orchestrated, every camera lens zoomed in. "We're exceptional at praising success stories," she continued, scanning the room. "We hold parades, distribute medals, and celebrate triumphant homecomings. But let us talk about the side no one likes to see. Let us talk about the nightmares, the trauma, the survivors who come back physically but remain trapped in the war in their minds." She paused, letting the gravity of her words settle. 3 years ago, Alicia said quietly, "I led a mission that went wrong. A close friend, Daniel Hayes, lost his life because of a miscalculation on my part. And you know what hurt the most? Not just his death, but the way the military moved on. A 2-page report, a folded flag, standard condolences. Everyone else turned the page, except for me and except for the people who truly loved him." Alicia saw a few older men in uniforms exchange discomfited glances, but she refused to waver. "Mr. President has given me the chance to speak openly, so I'll use it. The truth is that we lose more than just the soldiers who die in combat. We lose countless others, day by day, to PTSD, to depression, to addictions, and tragically, to suicides. We recite the number of those who fell in action, but we rarely speak about those who die quietly in their own homes, in bleak hospital corridors, or in parked cars, because they can't find a way to live with the memories." A solemn hush gripped the entire press room. The constant tapping of keyboards slowed, the usual chatter ceased. "I am not here seeking pity," Alicia asserted, voice firm yet resonant. "And I'm not here saying we shouldn't honor the winners or the fallen. But I am asking, who stands for the ones who continue to fight invisible battles, long after the parades are over? This isn't just my story. It's Daniel Hayes' story, and that of thousands more like him." She drew in a steadying breath. No one wanted to talk about Daniel, about what led to that disastrous operation, about the flaws that keep repeating themselves. No one wanted to talk about the fact that many of us who return home are never the same. And it's not just about feeling sad or traumatized. It's about a systematic void that doesn't address these invisible wounds. We say, "Thank you for your service," we wave flags, but how often do we follow up with real help? She let her words echo. Her eyes flickered to President Trump, who was seated in the front row, watching her intently, arms resting on his lap. She couldn't read his thoughts, but his posture showed no impatience or dismissal. "I ask you all, everyone listening to me right now, will we keep ignoring this reality, or will we finally shine a light on the hidden toll of warfare?" She ended abruptly, letting the silence speak volumes. The press room, brimming minutes earlier with a chaotic energy, now felt still, like a dormant volcano. Alicia stepped away from the microphone. The cameras continued to snap photos, capturing the unexpected hush. The thunderous reaction erupted almost the moment she left the podium. News channels scrambled to broadcast analysis. Unprecedented, shouted one anchor. A lieutenant openly challenges the system in front of the president. Another said, is this a call to reform, or is it naive idealism? Military analysts sprang onto primetime shows. Some hailed Alicia as a courageous voice, the kind that only surfaces once in a generation. Others criticized her for delivering an emotional appeal that could undermine unity, discipline, and the standard chain of command. A scowling retired admiral appeared on a major network. This sets a dangerous precedent, he declared. The armed forces cannot function if every officer with a grievance addresses the nation. We have protocols for a reason. Meanwhile, social media came alive. Hashtags like hashtag Alicia Coleman, hashtag Forgotten Soldiers, hashtag The Silent Cost soared in popularity. Debates flared on every corner of the internet. Some tweets praised her sincerity. Finally, someone said what we've all been thinking. Others were savage. Who does she think she is, crying for attention? She messed up, got someone killed, and now she's trying to guilt trip us. Alicia, in her small, government-arranged hotel room, turned on the TV only briefly to watch clips of her own face behind the podium, replayed again and again. News anchors dissected each phrase. Military officials offered commentary. She switched the TV off, exhaling heavily. She had known this storm would be fierce, but she hadn't anticipated how overwhelming the swirl of opinions, commentary, and analysis would feel. Yet amid the noise, there was a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had spoken. She had told Daniel Hayes' story to millions of people who would have otherwise never known his name. Despite the public tempest, words alone were never enough to reconfigure an entire system. Alicia understood that radical change demanded more: new policies, revised budgets, widespread acceptance, and real institutional re-examination. Behind the scenes, President Trump, though he made no direct statement tying his administration's next steps to Alicia's speech, swiftly ordered his top military and finance advisors to draft plans to expand the mental health budget for service members. A week later, the Redwood House approved a special fund to enhance programs for PTSD therapy, counseling, and other resources dedicated to active duty personnel and veterans. Naturally, pundits connected the dots, attributing the move to Alicia's public plea. Some lauded it as a sign that she had successfully spotlighted these problems. Others derided it as an opportunistic maneuver by the administration to score points by riding a surge of sympathy. Alicia didn't care about the political implications, she only cared that real help might reach people who desperately needed it. Soon after, she began a self-driven tour of different military hospitals, veteran support centers, and PTSD facilities across the country. Funded in part by the Navy's outreach program and partly out of her own desire, she wanted to look these soldiers in the eye, to hear their stories, and to figure out exactly what more needed to be done. In a rehab center in Pine Creek, she met Marcus Morales, a former Marine who lost 3 squad members to an improvised explosive device. He had come home physically intact but emotionally hollow. Nightmares, guilt, and an inability to reconnect with his family had led him to a breakdown. He'd attempted to end his life multiple times. When they first met, Marcus looked at Alicia, anger coiling in his gaze. "You think some fancy speech on TV fixes our problems?" he challenged. "We've been screaming for help for years." Alicia looked him squarely in the eye. "I don't think words alone can fix anything," she said softly. "But if we don't talk about it at all, nothing changes. Doing nothing guarantees more people suffer in silence." Marcus's tense shoulders relaxed slightly. Though he didn't fully trust her, he couldn't dismiss the raw sincerity in her eyes. In West Point Memorial Hospital, Alicia met Lucy Reynolds, a former military nurse who had seen dozens of soldiers die in her arms. She'd done her best to save them, but some wounds were simply too grave. Replaying each tragic loss in her memory, Lucy found it impossible to sleep. I don't want them telling me I'm a hero, Lucy said bitterly, tears close to the surface. I just want a day where I don't see their faces every time I close my eyes. Alicia took Lucy's hand, offering a wordless moment of solidarity before speaking. You deserve to heal, Alicia said, meaning every syllable. She met countless more like Lucy veterans who felt disconnected from the everyday world, families in search of answers about loved ones who ended their own lives, soldiers who dreaded the future because they couldn't shed the past. Each encounter fueled her mission. But not everyone embraced Alicia's activism. Certain high-ranking officers perceived her as a disruptive figure, someone stirring up too much emotion in an institution that prided itself on discipline and stoicism. Some conservative commentators criticized her public approach, arguing that it eroded the notion of an infallible chain of command. One retired officer made an appearance on a national news show, voice edged with sarcasm. Our armed forces don't need pity parties. If you can't handle the heat of combat, you shouldn't wear the uniform. Alicia, however, refused to be dragged into verbal spats. She knew that acknowledging mental health challenges and providing resources for them was not about coddling. It was about readiness and honor, about ensuring soldiers were truly cared for once the fighting stopped. Day by day, messages continued to flood her inbox, emails from veterans, phone calls from family members. Strangers would express gratitude. You spoke for my son who never came back the same, or I lost my husband to suicide. Thank you for telling the truth. Others were more terse but equally heartfelt. Now I know I'm not alone. Reading these messages, Alicia would often remember Daniel Hayes, the friend who died believing in her leadership. She had vowed not to let his memory fade into a footnote, and each letter reminded her she was keeping that promise. It was early morning at Arlington Field, a sprawling cemetery nestled in rolling hills beyond Redwood City. The sun had barely begun its ascent, and dew clung to each blade of grass. Rows of white headstones stretched out in perfect lines, each bearing a name and the silent record of a life ended. Alicia walked deliberately among them, the echoes of her footsteps subdued on the damp ground. She halted in front of a particular marker, inscribed with the name. Daniel Hayes. Beloved son, brother, and soldier. She looked down, the crisp breeze stirring her short hair. There was no one else around at this hour. She crouched and pressed her gloved fingertips to the cold stone. She had been here before. The difference now was that the weight of guilt she used to carry was no longer crushing her. Over the last 3 years, she had learned to transform her pain into purposeful action. Quietly, she spoke into the hush, I promised you I'd make them hear your story. And they did. Or at least, they started to. A pale sunrise emerged, a testament to the possibility of a new day. In the months since her fateful speech, the Redwood House had taken concrete steps toward improving support for soldiers in need. Budgets were redistributed to strengthen mental health care, and the conversation around PTSD became more open, less taboo. Alicia had even been invited to speak to new recruits, an invitation that stirred controversy among some traditionalists. Her path was by no means smooth or universally supported. Veterans of older generations, who believed in silent resilience, declared her approach was too soft. Pundits still accused her of using her tragedy for personal advancement, or of being manipulated as a political symbol. But none of that truly mattered. When Alicia saw those newly funded therapy centers or read about a soldier who found hope instead of ending their life, she knew she had done the right thing. Daniel, she whispered, resting a hand on his gravestone. You're not a ghost. And as long as I can still stand, neither you nor anyone else like you will be forgotten. She rose, adjusting the collar of her uniform. The sun's rays now lit the vast field of markers, each representing a story of a life forever changed by war. Even with the progress made, countless challenges lay ahead. For every step forward, naysayers clamored for a step back. Still, the door to honest dialogue had been pried open. And that alone was more than anyone had accomplished in a long, long while. In that quiet morning light, Alicia Coleman walked away from Daniel's grave, certain that this was not the end of her fight. Indeed, the real battle ensuring no more silent voices were left behind had only just begun. Epilogue, a call to action. Television anchors dubbed Alicia Coleman the conscience of the Navy. Newspaper op-eds debated whether her approach signaled a new era of transparency or threatened the military's core traditions. Late-night commentators had their quips, referencing the controversies swirling around her name. Social media cycles eventually found fresh topics, but there were always people who remembered her words. Within the Redwood House, Donald Trump never formally recanted or regretted giving Alicia that platform. Some of his advisors whispered that allowing such a speech was risky and politically fraught. But others saw its power, acknowledging that if the system failed to adapt, it risked eroding from within. And so the question remains, not just in Redwood City but across the entire nation. Are we prepared to keep facing the truths Alicia Coleman revealed and, more importantly, to enact real, lasting change for those who have sacrificed in ways we can barely comprehend? The conversation, once started, is hard to silence again. The choice belongs to every citizen, every voter, every service member, and every policymaker. Will we make sure Daniel Hayes and others like him did not give their lives in vain? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe the military must reform its approach to supporting returning soldiers, particularly regarding mental health and emotional well-being? If this story has meaning for you, please like, share, and subscribe for more content that explores the untold sides of service and sacrifice. Thank you for taking the time to read. Together, by sharing these stories, we can help ensure that no one is left to fight their battles alone and that sacrifice, when made, is never allowed to fade into silence.